I still remember the day my boss told me I was wasting my time. His office had beige walls, a single dusty plant in the corner, and a window that overlooked a busy street. I had asked him for a raise after months of overtime, hoping he'd recognize my dedication. Instead, he laughed like I'd told the world's funniest joke. He leaned back in his squeaky chair and said, "You want more money? You're just not cut out for bigger roles. I'm doing you a favor by keeping you on the team. You'd never make it on your own." Those words landed like a punch in the gut. My cheeks grew hot, and my eyes stung with tears I refused to shed. I tried to keep my composure, nodding as if I understood. Inside, I was crushed and furious all at once. I left his office with my fists clenched, determined not to cry at work. That night, I tossed and turned in bed, replaying his words. Despite feeling defeated, I sensed a strange spark inside my chest. I decided then and there that I wouldn't let his cruel prediction define my future. I was going to prove him wrong. After that humiliating meeting, I spent weeks wrestling with self-doubt. Every morning, I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, trying to convince myself I deserved more. My boss's sneer still hovered in my mind. It was like a ghost haunting me each time I stepped foot in the office. Outside of work, I started devouring self-help books and listening to motivational podcasts, desperately searching for a reason to believe in myself again. Their stories and strategies felt distant, but they kept me company on lonely nights. I also jotted down random business ideas in a small spiral notebook I kept by my bed. Most of those ideas seemed impossible, until one concept started to shine a little brighter than the rest. It was a simple consulting idea, something I believed I could do better than the company I worked for. Late one night, fueled by sheer determination, I typed out a rough business plan. My hands trembled as I imagined presenting that plan to investors or clients someday. But as I finished, I thought about that harsh voice telling me I'd never make it. A wave of uncertainty followed. I tucked my plan away, unsure if I'd ever have the courage to use it. Everything changed the day I overheard a conversation in the break room. A colleague was venting about our lack of proper client engagement and how the entire system felt outdated. I couldn't help but eavesdrop from behind a stack of file boxes. My heart pounded because this was exactly where my business idea could make a difference. I decided to jump in, cautiously. "I've been thinking about ways to improve our process," I said softly. The colleague looked startled at first, then curious. We spent our lunch break talking about all the flaws in the current approach and how clients often felt neglected. That discussion lit a new fire in me. People at our office saw the flaws too. They wanted change, but nobody believed management would listen, especially not our boss. I realized that if I ever started my own venture, I wouldn't just be filling a gap in the market, I'd also be standing up for people who felt ignored or undervalued. By the end of the day, the spiral notebook came out of hiding. I added fresh details based on my colleagues' complaints. My dream started to feel more real, and for the first time, I believed I might actually make it happen. A few weeks later, opportunity knocked in the most unexpected way. I was working late, hunched over a spreadsheet, when I got an email from a local business group. They were hosting a small networking event for aspiring entrepreneurs, and one of my old college friends had forwarded me the invitation. I stared at it, heart racing. I felt a surge of conflicting emotions. My boss's voice still whispered discouraging words in the back of my mind, but a stronger, calmer part of me reasoned that this was exactly the kind of event I needed. I clicked register before I could talk myself out of it. On the evening of the event, I walked into a modest venue filled with folding chairs and plastic tables. The place was buzzing with conversation. I introduced myself to a few strangers, feeling nervous, but also strangely at home. These people were dreamers, just like me. They spoke openly about their hopes, struggles, and bright ideas. That night, I walked away with half a dozen business cards and a renewed sense of purpose. I realized I had a chance to do something meaningful. All that was left was to find the courage to take the first step. Returning to work after that networking event felt like walking through a fog. My boss's voice, the dull chatter in the office, and the stale atmosphere all seemed distant, as if I'd already outgrown them. I went through the motions, completing tasks that felt small compared to the vision forming in my mind. At lunch, I escaped to a nearby park with my notebook. A few ducks paddled across the pond, and the cool breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass. I flipped through my scribbled ideas, organizing them into something coherent. I wrote a basic mission statement. I will provide consulting services that genuinely value human connection and real communication. Looking at those words made my heart flutter. It was a promise to myself and to anyone who would ever work with me. After finishing my notes, I realized my lunch break was almost over. I walked back toward the office building, glancing up at the drab facade. The thought of returning to that environment filled me with a strange mixture of sadness and impatience. Something had to change soon, or I'd wither under that fluorescent lighting. I decided that day. My resignation was coming, and I wouldn't look back. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. My heart pounded as I thought about the resignation letter I'd typed up the night before. At sunrise, I brewed a cup of coffee and stared at my laptop screen. The letter was short, clear, and polite. It was also my ticket to freedom. By the time I got to the office, my palms were sweaty and I could barely focus on my tasks. I wanted to drop off the letter and walk out forever, but fear crept in. What if my boss was right? What if my business failed and I was left with nothing? Late in the day, I finally mustered the courage. I placed the sealed envelope on my boss's desk. He picked it up with a raised eyebrow and opened it with deliberate slowness. Once he realized what it was, he looked at me with a smirk. "You sure about this?" he asked, standing up from his chair. My throat felt tight, but I managed a nod. "I'm sure," I replied, forcing my voice to stay steady. Without another word, I turned and left his office. My chest tightened with a mix of terror and exhilaration. My new life had officially begun. Walking out of that building for the last time felt surreal. I paused at the front doors, taking one long, shaky breath. The air tasted fresher than it had in years. My heart thumped as if trying to convince me I was still alive despite my fear. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind whirled with possibilities and worst-case scenarios. I paced my apartment, flipping through my notes and rereading every page. The consulting concept had real potential, but reality struck me like a sudden chill. I had no consistent clientele, no brand recognition, and barely enough savings to cover my rent for the next few months. Still, I felt a deep sense of rightness about my choice. Even if I failed, at least I wouldn't spend every day listening to my boss undermine me. That alone felt like freedom worth fighting for. Over the next few days, I worked on establishing my business legally. I registered the name, created a simple website, and set up a professional email address. While these steps were small, each felt like an enormous leap toward my dream. Each morning, I told myself that fear was just another obstacle I had to conquer, and I refused to let it win. My first potential client was a small design studio run by a friend of a friend. We arranged a meeting at a cozy cafe downtown. I spent the night before rehearsing my pitch in front of the bathroom mirror, trying to sound confident, but not arrogant. When I arrived, my nerves buzzed. I could almost hear my pulse in my ears. The studio's owner, a soft-spoken woman named Carol, sat at a corner table. She looked up, offered me a warm smile, and gestured for me to sit. Over cups of tea, she explained her biggest challenge. She had talented designers but struggled to communicate the studio's value to potential clients. People saw their artwork as a hobby, not a viable commercial service. I listened intently, scribbling notes and nodding with genuine compassion. Everything she described resonated with what I'd gone through in my old job, being overlooked and undervalued. Toward the end, I cleared my throat, trying to steady the tremor in my voice. I told her about my consulting approach, real conversations, real relationships, and clear, simple strategies. She listened, then asked a single question: "When can we start?" My heart soared. I shook her hand, thankful that my first real client believed in me. During the next few weeks, I poured my soul into helping Carol's studio. We spent hours refining how they pitched their services, focusing on genuine human connections, rather than just flashy designs. I created a step-by-step guide for her and her team. Everything from how to send friendly yet professional emails to how to follow up with interested leads without appearing pushy. Together, we practiced role-playing scenarios, Carol's voice would crack with nerves, but I'd gently reassure her, reminding her that she was offering something valuable. This process wasn't just about boosting her confidence. It was about proving to myself that I knew what I was doing. After a month of work, she landed a sizable contract with a local restaurant chain needing rebranding. When she called to tell me the news, I practically jumped out of my chair. Hearing her excitement, I felt a surge of pride and relief. Maybe I wasn't so doomed after all. That night, I celebrated with cheap takeout and a personal toast in my tiny apartment. The takeout didn't taste like victory, but in my heart, I knew this was a milestone. I whispered to myself, I can do this. And for the first time, I truly believed it. Word spread faster than I could have dreamed. Carol recommended me to a friend who ran a small boutique, and that friend told someone else. Suddenly, my calendar was filling with consultations, some paying well and others just enough to keep the lights on. Each new client reminded me that I had something valuable to offer. Still, every small victory came with a pang of anxiety. My savings dwindled as I juggled daily expenses and reinvested into my business. I rented a tiny co-working space to appear more professional, and I started tinkering with online ads to attract more leads. Late at night, I would second-guess everything. Was I overextending myself? Should I have stayed at my old job a bit longer to save more money? Then I'd remember the grin on my boss's face, telling me I'd never succeed. That memory fueled me like adrenaline. I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing me fail. In those first few months, my days blurred into a cycle of client meetings, revision sessions, and frantic marketing attempts. I was exhausted, yet more alive than I'd ever been under that fluorescent glare. Each day proved that I had made the right choice, no matter how hard it was. I soon faced my first major challenge. One of my new clients, a small chain of gift shops, suddenly decided they didn't need my services. They cited budget cuts. I tried to negotiate a scaled-back plan, but they insisted on ending our contract early. I was crushed. That contract had promised a steady income for at least 6 months, which I'd counted on to stabilize my finances. Now, I was left scrambling. I felt a wave of panic late that evening as I sat in my cramped co-working space, staring at spreadsheets and bills. Dark thoughts slipped in, whispering that maybe I was in over my head. But then I remembered Carol's voice, bright with excitement when she landed her big client. I remembered how it felt to empower someone who'd felt helpless. I also remembered the lump in my throat when my ex-boss told me I was worthless. No, I couldn't give up now. I leaned forward, determined to find a solution. If I lost one client, I would find 2 more. I opened my laptop and started emailing people who'd shown even the slightest interest in my services. If there was one thing I'd learned, it was that resilience would be my greatest asset. I threw myself back into work with renewed vigor. I brainstormed more creative marketing strategies, including a free webinar aimed at small business owners who were new to the idea of relationship-focused consulting. The webinar covered easy-to-follow communication tips, and I made sure to present the material in a friendly, straightforward manner. To my surprise, over 30 people attended. Most of them lingered online afterward, asking questions and sharing their own struggles. One attendee was a nervous startup founder who desperately needed guidance to secure investor interest. Another was a restaurant manager who struggled with high staff turnover. Listening to their stories, I realized that people were hungry for sincere support. By the end of that webinar, I had booked 3 new clients. I felt a rush of relief and excitement. I emailed each of them personalized proposals, careful not to sound pushy. Within a week, they'd all signed contracts. Deep in my gut, I sensed a shift. My name was slowly becoming associated with honest advice and practical solutions. Despite setbacks, my client list was growing. I felt hopeful again, and it reminded me that sometimes losing one contract only opens the door to better opportunities. Even though business was improving, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still operating on a shaky foundation. I didn't have a team, just me juggling every role: consultant, marketer, accountant, customer service rep, and even receptionist. My days blurred together in a constant hustle, and I worried about burning out. I reached out to a couple of trusted friends, explaining my situation. They had stable jobs in marketing and accounting, and I thought maybe they'd consider freelance work on the side. Surprisingly, they were excited about the idea of contributing to my growing venture. Each had talents I lacked, which could help me focus on core consulting tasks. We tested the waters with a few small projects. My friend Jessica, with her knack for social media marketing, helped me create polished ad campaigns. My friend Paul, an accountant by day, made sure my financial records were accurate. Suddenly, I wasn't shouldering every burden alone. That sense of teamwork was new and exhilarating. For the first time, I saw my business as more than a one-person show. I felt the beginnings of a genuine company taking shape. A company built on trust, respect, and the dream of offering real value to clients. With Jessica and Paul on board part-time, I noticed an immediate shift. My schedule opened up, allowing me to focus on high-level client strategy rather than scrambling over invoices or ad copy. Our workflow felt smoother, like gears finally clicking into place. One afternoon, we all gathered in my tiny co-working space. We brainstormed how to position our consulting services in a more compelling way. Jessica recommended we spotlight the personal stories of our clients, how our advice had changed their businesses, or how their confidence improved after applying our tips. Paul suggested using real data to prove our effectiveness. I listened, inspired by their ideas. It felt surreal to call these people my team. Once, I couldn't even convince my old boss that I was worthy of a promotion. Now I had talented allies who believed in my vision. By the end of the day, we had sketched out a mini rebrand, complete with a tagline, "Real connections, real results." We also planned an official launch event for our upgraded brand. My heart beat with hope and anticipation. I couldn't help but smile at how far I'd come, from an underappreciated employee to a budding entrepreneur leading a small but passionate team. The launch event took place in a borrowed gallery space downtown. We decorated it with bright posters showcasing testimonials and success stories. Friends, clients, and even some curious onlookers came to see what we were all about. Soft music played in the background, and we offered simple refreshments, coffee, tea, and finger foods. I stood near the entrance, greeting people with a mixture of excitement and nerves. This was a big moment, the public unveiling of a dream that had started in a spiral notebook. My eyes roamed the crowd, landing on Carol, who waved at me with a grateful smile. Seeing her reminded me how much my service meant to people. Midway through the event, I stepped onto a small platform to give a short speech. My hands trembled, and my voice wavered at first, but I looked around at the supportive faces and found my composure. I spoke about the importance of genuine relationships, about how every business has a story worth telling, and how we aimed to help them tell it better. When I finished, the applause echoed in that tiny gallery. I felt tears prick my eyes. At that moment, I knew I'd found my place in the world. The launch event spurred new opportunities. Several attendees asked for follow-up meetings, intrigued by our approach. One, in particular, was an investor who saw promise in what we were doing. She invited me to a more formal discussion over lunch, hinting that she had resources that could help us expand. At first, I was skeptical. Investors often came with strings attached, sometimes demanding control or pushing for growth that clashed with personal values. But Jessica and Paul encouraged me to at least hear her out. So on a bright Friday afternoon, I found myself at a classy restaurant, trying not to fidget with the starched napkin in my lap. The investor Angela was poised and experienced. She asked thoughtful questions about our business model, our client pipeline, and how we differentiated ourselves from traditional consulting firms. I answered carefully, emphasizing our people-first philosophy. She seemed genuinely impressed. Before we left, Angela said, "I think you're on to something special. I'd like to discuss terms for a potential investment." My heart fluttered. We set a date for a second meeting, and I walked out into the sunshine with cautious optimism. Maybe, just maybe, we were ready to take the next step forward. Negotiations with Angela unfolded over the next few weeks. We emailed detailed proposals back and forth, adjusting equity percentages and defining roles. She offered a generous capital injection that could fund more staff, better equipment, and a more impressive office space. But I had one non-negotiable point. I refused to compromise our company's core philosophy, treating clients like people, not numbers. In one tense meeting, Angela suggested streamlining the consulting process with automated systems, which might reduce the personal touch we prided ourselves on. I took a deep breath and explained why that went against everything we stood for. It felt nerve-wracking to challenge someone who held the financial keys to our future, but I also knew I had to protect the integrity of what we'd built. To my relief, Angela respected my conviction. She nodded and said, "Your passion is what makes this business unique. Let's find a balance." We eventually reached an agreement that both sides could embrace. She would invest in us, and in return, she'd serve as a strategic advisor without overruling our approach. On signing day, I couldn't help but think about my ex-boss sneering at me. How shocked he would be to see an investor putting faith in my vision now. The influx of capital allowed us to move into a bigger office. Still modest, but roomy enough for a small conference area and a few extra desks. Jessica and Paul officially joined full-time, and I brought on 2 more consultants who shared our relationship-driven philosophy. Our little team felt like a family, all dedicated to the same mission. From day one in the new space, we faced a flurry of activity. More client inquiries poured in, and the phone rang constantly. Each call reminded me of how far I'd come from the days of cowering in my boss's office. Now, I led a legitimate company that people trusted, but growth also brought new challenges. I had to learn about leadership, how to delegate tasks effectively, how to resolve conflicts among staff, and how to maintain a united culture amid rapid expansion. The pressure kept me awake at night. Some mornings, I'd arrive at the office with dark circles under my eyes, hoping no one noticed how exhausted I felt. Despite the stress, I was living my dream. The sense of purpose outweighed the doubt. Each day, I walked into that office determined to nurture not just my business, but the people who made it possible. One afternoon, I got a phone call that jolted me like a bolt of lightning. It was from a contact at my old workplace, a friend who still endured my ex-boss's toxic leadership. He said the company was struggling financially and was considering hiring outside consultants to help them modernize. My ex-boss had been vocal about how times were tough, but apparently the issues ran deeper. I felt a swirl of emotions, satisfaction, curiosity, and a tinge of lingering hurt. I wasn't sure if I even wanted to get involved, but my friend insisted that management was desperate. They'd put out a request for proposals from consulting firms. He mentioned that if my firm submitted one, it might actually get considered. After I hung up, I stared at the phone, heart pounding. Was this my chance to prove my ex-boss wrong in the most direct way possible? Or was it a trap, a chance for him to belittle me once again? I weighed my options, sharing the news with Jessica, Paul, and the rest of the team. We held a quick meeting, and the consensus was clear. We should at least try. Succeed or fail, we owed it to ourselves to compete on equal footing. We spent the next few days drafting a proposal. It was surreal, writing strategies for a company I once worked for. I remembered exactly where their communication structure was broken, the frustration employees felt, and how that boss discouraged innovation. Part of me wanted to showcase every flaw he ignored, but I pushed aside any pettiness and stuck to a professional tone. In the cover letter, I highlighted our people-first approach, suggesting it could rebuild trust inside the company and with their clients. Jessica and Paul contributed valuable insights, refining each section until it was airtight. Submitting it felt nerve-wracking, as if I were applying for a job I knew too well. Days passed without a response. I started to assume they'd chosen a different firm. Then, on a cloudy afternoon, an email popped into my inbox. It read, "We'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss your proposal in more detail." My heart pounded as I read the signature block at the bottom. It was from the company's CEO, not my ex-boss. This meant they were taking our pitch seriously. After all those years, I was finally going to walk back into that building, not as an employee, but as a potential consultant. The day of the meeting arrived. I dressed in a sharp navy blue suit, much nicer than anything I'd worn back when I was an underpaid employee. As I approached the office complex, memories flooded me. The dimly lit hallways, the outdated cubicles, the break room with stale coffee. But this time I walked in with confidence. Head held high. The receptionist led me to a conference room. My ex-boss was already there, along with the CEO and a couple of department heads. My old boss shifted uneasily in his seat when I entered, giving me a half-hearted nod. I smiled, remembering the time he told me I'd never make it on my own. The CEO spoke first, thanking me for coming and praising our well-prepared proposal. I launched into a concise overview of how our consulting method could realign their internal operations, focusing on clear communication, updated tech tools, and employee empowerment. The department heads seemed intrigued, asking pointed questions that I answered to the best of my ability. My ex-boss mostly stayed quiet, shooting occasional glances my way. I couldn't tell if he was embarrassed or seething. When the meeting wrapped up, the CEO promised a decision soon. I stepped out, breathing in the fresh air of hard-earned respect. Less than a week later, the CEO called. She wanted to hire my firm. I nearly dropped the phone in disbelief. This was a pivotal moment, a literal full-circle opportunity. They were willing to pay a substantial fee for our services, plus a bonus if we met specific performance targets. My team erupted in celebration when I shared the news. Even Angela, our investor, sent a message of congratulations and emphasized how this could open doors to even larger clients. I felt a mix of excitement and vindication. For so long, I had been haunted by my ex-boss's scorn. Now, he had to watch me lead the very changes he once deemed impossible. We got to work immediately. I assigned tasks to each consultant, focusing on employee training, tech upgrades, and a communication overhaul. During early meetings, I noticed how employees lit up when we asked for their input. It felt gratifying to give them what I'd always wanted, a voice. A few days in, I caught a glimpse of my ex-boss in the hallway. He seemed smaller, as if the weight of his own negativity had finally worn him down. He avoided eye contact, but I just nodded politely, too focused on success to dwell on old resentments. As our project progressed, the company saw remarkable improvements in morale and efficiency. Employees became more engaged, and new clients showed interest. My team collected data to measure each milestone. We hit our first performance target a month ahead of schedule, securing that bonus. Still, something about this arrangement felt incomplete. Whenever I walked through the building, I noticed signs of deeper financial trouble. Delayed maintenance, outdated equipment, and a sense of cautious optimism tinged with fear. Rumors floated around that the company was seeking a buyer, and the CEO was open to offers. At first, I dismissed the rumors. Then, a conversation with Angela sparked a bold idea. "If the company is truly for sale," she said, "why not consider buying it?" I laughed nervously, thinking she was joking. But Angela was serious. "You understand their challenges better than anyone. With the right plan, you could turn it around for good." The idea was as wild as it was tempting. I called a brief meeting with my inner circle, Jessica, Paul, and Angela, and we discussed the possibilities. My old boss had once told me I'd never succeed on my own, and now I was contemplating buying the entire company he still worked for. We dove into the financials. The company had potential, but they were weighed down by outdated systems and a leadership vacuum. However, with our consulting framework already implemented, we had a head start in turning things around. If we could secure the right financing, buying them wouldn't just be a power move. It could be a solid investment. I scheduled a private meeting with the CEO, who was surprisingly open to the conversation. She'd been looking for buyers who not only had the money but also the vision to breathe new life into the business. After we tossed around some numbers, we landed on a tentative agreement. It was expensive, but Angela believed we could manage with strategic partnerships and her network of investors. I felt both exhilarated and terrified. This was a high-stakes gamble, far bigger than anything I'd done. But I kept picturing the day I'd walked out of that place, feeling belittled and worthless. Now I was poised to do something I never even dreamed possible. We set a timeline for due diligence and final negotiations. My team worked around the clock, scrutinizing every line of the company's balance sheet. We wanted no surprises. If I was going to own this place, I needed to be absolutely sure. The final deal closed on a bright morning that felt like the start of something extraordinary. After signing what felt like endless paperwork, I walked into the newly acquired office complex as its owner. My ex-boss hovered nearby, looking stunned. He avoided my gaze, but I could feel the weight of his disbelief. Word quickly spread that I had purchased the company and even the entire office complex. Employees exchanged excited whispers, and a wave of cautious hope seemed to wash through the halls. Standing at the entrance, I addressed the staff, promising that my leadership would focus on respect, growth, and shared success. Later in the day, I found myself alone in my old boss's office. The same beige walls, that dusty plant in the corner. Only now, the space was mine. I took a slow, steady breath, reflecting on how far I'd come. From a dismissed, underappreciated employee to the owner of this enterprise, I had shattered the low expectations set for me. My phone buzzed with congratulatory messages from friends, family, and clients. Grinning, I walked out of that office with confidence. The journey had been grueling and uncertain, but one thing was clear. I had finally proven him, and all my own fears, absolutely wrong.